Hello, in this lesson we're going to continue scripting our random prompt placement blueprint. So let's go ahead and get right back into it. So go ahead and double click to open our BP random prompt placement blueprint. And we left off with setting our line trace length. So now what we need to do is actually decide whether or not we need to actually add any static mesh instances. So what we want to do is check a few things. First though, we need to make a couple variables. So the first variable we need to make is going to be our mesh to spawn variable. So we need to know what we're actually going to be spawning in our level. So we need to make this a static mesh variable type, and we do want to make this editable or public, and we want to change the category to setup. And we'll go ahead and add a tooltip as the static mesh to use. Just the static mesh to use, that's fine. We don't need to be any more specific than that. So with this, we want to make sure that we're actually able to spawn meshes. So we're going to do that with two different Boolean checks, and I'm going to combine those together. So the first thing we're going to do is actually create a branch. So we can do that really quickly by holding the B key on the keyboard, B as in branch, and left clicking. And go and grab a branch. So we'll go ahead and connect that. Now for the condition, there are actually two conditions we need to look at. The first is we need to make sure that mesh to spawn, so grab a reference to that. We need to make sure this is valid. So we need to drag off that and search for is valid, and we want the function is valid, not the question mark, so there's F. So what this does is it checks to make sure that mesh to spawn is valid, meaning that it's usable, non-null, and not pending kill. So basically that means that we can actually use this mesh to spawn. It's okay to use the contents of that variable, which right now it actually wouldn't be because we're having this set to none, which is perfectly fine. We want to make sure that this blueprint can be used for pretty much anything we want, so we're going to leave that as none right now. So we want to take this, which is a Boolean value, but we also need to check if we actually have a specific number in mind for what, or basically how many meshes we want to spawn. And what we need to do that is another variable, and this is going to be called number of meshes. So this is the number of meshes to spawn. So we need to make that editable. We need to change its variable type to integer. And we need to change the category to setup. And we'll just go ahead and add a tooltip of the number of meshes to add to the level. Now this number of meshes, let's go ahead and compile so we can set a default value of 1. That way we'll at least be doing one mesh when we're using this blueprint. So go ahead and drag that out and get a reference to it. And we want to make sure that this is greater than 0. So now we have two Boolean values we need to check. Now we could do two branch statements, but that can get a little messy. So we'd like to keep it with just one branching statement. So what we're actually going to do is drag off of this return value, search for the word and, get an and Boolean node, and when we join these together, it means both of these have to be true, and this will return true, meaning that our mesh to spawn has to be valid and our number of meshes has to be greater than 0. And that would be the time that we would actually spawn anything. So let's add a quick comment to this branch. We can do that by clicking the little 3 periods right here, the little ellipsis. And let's go ahead and add the comment of should we add any, and I'm going to hit return, static mesh instances. So what I like to do is when I have branches is go ahead and ask the question that the branch is answering, which in this case is should I spawn or should I add any static mesh instances. So if that's true, then we can go on and keep scripting. But if it's false, we should really print a message to the screen. So we'll search for print string, and we'll do a quick message of check for valid static mesh and /or spawning less than one static mesh instance. So that way, if there is an issue, we'll get this printed out to the screen. And we can go ahead and change the text color to be a nice kind of bright kind of red color, so it'll catch our eye. So that way if there is an issue, this will get printed to the screen and to the log so that we'll know, hey, there was a problem with our construction script, so we can go check this out. So now that we've decided, okay, whether or not we're going to actually add any static meshes, we need to do a couple more things. So the next thing we need to do is we need to actually set the static mesh we're going to use. So we have it already a variable here, but we haven't actually told our SM instances, basically our instance static mesh component, we haven't told it what static mesh it needs to use. So let's get a reference to that component, and we'll also get a reference to our mesh to spawn variable. And we will take this SM instances and we will search for set static mesh, and we'll find that node, and we want to set the SM instances, set its static mesh to our mesh to spawn. So that will be the next thing we do. Once that's done, then we need to actually get into our for loop, meaning that we actually need to go through and start looping through how many of these meshes that we actually want to be spawning into our level, or adding into our level. I keep saying spawning. Technically we're adding instances of a static mesh, but the end result is the same, that we're having more numbers of static meshes in our level. So what we need to do is go search for a for loop. And we want to make sure that we get a for loop, not a for each loop, and not the one with the break. So just a for loop, and connect those together. So this for loop, the first index is going to be 0, and the last index is going to be the number of meshes, and we're actually going to subtract from this. We'll do subtract 1 from this. And there we go. There is our number of meshes. Minus 1 is going to feed right into our for loop. Now we're going to go ahead and stop the video here, and that's because the next thing we need to get into with this for loop is actually our line trace, and that is a little complex to set up to make sure all the line traces are being drawn correctly. So that we don't go over on this video, we're going to go ahead and stop right here, and in the next video we'll tackle doing our line traces.